It's the amazing Rico Brogna podcast with your host, Evan Roberts.
Welcome, everybody, to a Rico Brogna that I am damn excited about, and I hope you are too. It is a stroll down memory lane as we are going to listen to, analyze, and rank the greatest home runs in the history of the New York Mets. As I've explained before, this exercise was kind of inspired by how special 2024 was. The New York Mets had 3 different home runs in 2024 that you can definitely argue live in Met history. 3 home runs that may top this very list. Of course, we're talking about Francisco Lindor's dramatic game-winning 2-run home run in Game 161 against the Atlanta Braves that sent the Mets to the postseason. We're talking about Pete Alonso's incredibly dramatic, kind of, resume-changing home run against the Milwaukee Brewers as the Mets were about to be eliminated. And I think Pete Alonso was about to be dragged through the mud, considering how he didn't hit that series, didn't hit in September. He had dropped a pop-up a few innings earlier. So it was not only a home run that saved the Mets season, and they continued on, but I think it saved the legacy of one Pete Alonso. And then the third one that I would put on that list from 2024 was, of course, Francisco Lindor's grand slam home run at a rocking, crazy Citi Field that helped send the Mets to the National League Division Series. Those 3 home runs are not on the list. It's not that they're not there because they're not deserving, but the exercise is with so much time to kind of analyze and think about all the home runs in the history of the franchise. This will give us all a much better idea of where these 3 home runs rank. So as you listen to the multi-parted edition of Rico Brogna, in your own brain, you can say, okay, this is now where I slot in Lindor's Game 161 home run. Okay, this is now where I slot Pete Alonso's home run against the Brewers. And I think eventually, at the conclusion of this podcast, I will give you my opinion on where they rank. But for now, it's a top 20 list. For those wondering who ranked it, how is this put together? I'm going to be completely honest with you. I did it. Okay? I analyzed. I thought about it. I talked to some elder statesmen, and I just tried to give my unbiased opinion on where I would rank these home runs. Now, naturally, many of these home runs I didn't see live. Many of these home runs are historical footnotes that I learned about. So I did my best as not only a diehard Met fan, but I like to think a historian, to put these home runs in its proper place. Obviously, if you disagree with where they are ranked, if you are one of our older Rico listeners or one of our younger Rico listeners, and you think I'm overrating an older home run or underrating an older home run, totally fine. You can email us. You can yell at us. You can do whatever you want. It's the beauty of opinions, right? TheRicoB@gmail.com. So in this episode, we will go through home run number 20 all the way up to home run number 11. In a few more days, or maybe you've waited a while and it's already out, we'll have a separate Rico where we go from number 10 to number 1. So my question is to my fellow New York Met fans during this holiday season, are you ready? Are you ready to get emotional? Are you ready to maybe learn a thing or two? Maybe you're like, I don't know much about that home run. I'm a Met fan, but I don't know what the hell happened 40 years ago. Let us all take a stroll down memory lane. And let's start off with home run number 20. Just to give you the full context, there are 1, 2, 3 home runs that are not postseason home runs. So most of the home runs you're about to hear are going to be postseason home runs. In fact, I'll give you the exact number. 16 of the 20 that made the top 20 are postseason home runs. In fact, 18 of the 20 are home runs that were hit in seasons in which the Mets made the playoffs. Believe it or not, there are 2 home runs that were hit in years in which the Mets did not make the postseason. And let's start right there with number 20. I want to take you back to April 9th, 1985. Mets had a very good year in 1985, as you may know. They did miss the playoffs, but if there was a wild card, they would have made it. But it was opening day at Shea Stadium. The New York Mets were taking on their arch rivals, or at least they were about to become even more of their arch rivals, the St. Louis Cardinals. And Gary Carter was making his New York Mets debut. Obviously, the Mets were building this great young core. Darryl Strawberry had come up. Doc Gooden had come up. They had traded for Keith Hernandez while they were still down in the middle of the 1983 season. But now, as it's highly kind of mentioned all these years later, Gary Carter turned out to be the final piece of the puzzle. And it was a stunner. Beningo would tell me it was a stunner. My dad would tell me it was a stunner. It came out of nowhere when they found out that the Mets had worked this shocking blockbuster trade with the Montreal Expos to acquire one of the best catchers in baseball, Gary Carter. Before we had our I can't believe Mike Piazza is a Met moment from my generation, the older generation had the I can't believe Gary Carter is a Met moment. And wouldn't you believe, and imagine if we get this year with Juan Soto, Gary Carter, in his New York Mets debut, highly anticipated, in 1985, came to the plate in the bottom of the 10th inning of a tie game, and, well, wouldn't you believe it? Here it is, home run number 20.
Another breaking ball, and this could be the ball game. Deep to left, out of here. Gary Carter, a game-winning home run in the bottom of the 10th inning, and the Mets win on opening day 6-5. Welcome to New York, Gary Carter.
This game started with the World Series atmosphere, and I think it has more one right now.
And they love Carter here in New York already.
Can you believe that? I mean, I've known about this. One of the early lessons I got as a Met fan was Gary Carter hitting a home run on opening day in 1985. And I think what we do as fans is we try to say, how would that feel in our generation? Well, during an offseason in which the Mets added Juan Soto, and I would say it was shocking. I know the Mets were linked to Juan Soto for a long time, but at the end of the day, them getting him, as you saw on that live Rico wait party, was still sort of stunning. So, in a way, it's the Gary Carter acquisition all these years later. Obviously, Soto's a little bit younger. It's a little bit different. But imagine Citi Field, opening day, and Juan Soto hits a walk-off home run. And honestly, I don't even think that could really happen because the Mets open up on the road. This was truly Gary Carter's first game as a New York Met. And to add some irony to it, at least to me, it's a little ironic, the guy he hit the home run off of is a guy by the name of Neil Allen, who the Mets traded to get Keith Hernandez. And when you think about 1986, which was a year later, this was not 1986. This was 1985, the year in which they won 98 games, had a classic pennant race with the St. Louis Cardinals. But Gary Carter turned out to be the final piece of the puzzle. And Neil Allen was traded for Keith Hernandez, who a few years earlier was almost the first piece of the puzzle. So incredible moment. It's a regular season home run. And it's a home run that didn't lead to the postseason. This is one of those rare home runs that happened in a non-postseason season. But to me, trying to be fair about this, the excitement of Gary Carter being a Met, the excitement of him hitting a walk-off home run on opening day, crazy. By the way, I did some research, and I saw that they won the second game of the season as well. And I noticed that the Mets won in a walk-off as well, second game of the year. Not exactly a sellout, not exactly, the game everybody talks about. And I looked it up out of curiosity, bases loaded walk. Not quite as exciting as a Gary Carter walk-off, but hey, certainly exciting in its own regard. That's home run number 20. Let's get to home run number 19. So this one is so ingrained in my head because my youngest son, or my oldest son, I should say, Jet, was born just a few days earlier. Okay, 11 days earlier, I had a child for the first time. It's like crazy. I can't believe I got a kid. And the New York Mets are engaged in this incredible pennant race, the 2 wild card era, I like to call it. They were in a race with the San Francisco Giants and the St. Louis Cardinals. And the Mets had taken control of this wild card race until they started to struggle. They lost a few games in a row, including to a very bad Atlanta Brave team. And it started to feel like they were collapsing. It started to feel like, oh my God, this great run is just completely disappearing. And so they played a game on a Thursday night against the Philadelphia Phillies. And it was kind of a culture shock because it was one of those games where my wife looked at me and said, there's no way you're going. I mean, you'll still get to games, hun, but this one, you ain't going to. We have a son. He's 11 days old. And by the way, not only are you not going to this game, you're going to rock him to sleep. So I like to consider this the first game Jet ever saw. He's 11 days old. They're playing the Philadelphia Phillies in what felt like an absolute must-win game because of the 3-game losing streak they were on. In fact, I give you the standings going into this game. The Mets, the Cardinals, and the Giants all tied at 80 and 72. So all of a sudden, they're in a 3-way tie. They jump out to an early 2-0 lead. They quickly blow the lead. They're down 3-2. Then they tie the game. Then they take the lead. And then in the 8th inning of this game, Addison Reed completely crapped the bed. He gave up a 3-run home run to Maikel Franco. And so now the Mets were down by 2 runs, and it looked like it was over. It looked like they were screwed. And then dramatically, Jose Reyes, with 1 out in the 9th inning, hit a game-tying 2-run home run. And the Mets had come back, and they had tied the game. Believe it or not, this was the era before the Manfred man was placed on second base. So it was normal extra innings. And the New York Mets gave up 2 runs in the top of the 11th inning. We blame J-Ris Familiar for that. That sounds very, very familiar. And so here the Mets were about to lose this horrible game, this back and forth, dramatic, but appears to be their 4th consecutive loss. They're going to drop out of a wild card spot. There is 2 men on base. There's 1 out. They're down by 2 runs. And as Drupal Cabrera comes to the plate, as Jet is in my arms and I'm maintaining scoring a game, the New York Mets had a moment that told me and told my 11-day-old son, we will not blow this. We're going to the playoffs. As Drupal Cabrera told us all why.
And Cabrera hits from a deep right field. Back goes Borges near the wall. It's out of here! Out of here! As Drupal Cabrera wins it for New York. A 3-run walk-off home run. On a night of comebacks, as Drupal Cabrera provides the final jump as the Mets leapfrog to a 9-8 victory. Put a 3-game losing streak behind them. And get that feeling again of celebration.
I'll tell you why, because I know you hear an emotional story with my son and you think, oh, you're being biased. You're putting that up there because you had your son in your arms, 11 days old. You're being biased, Evan. That's not the 19th best home run in Met history. I'd argue you're wrong because when the Mets make the playoffs, it's special. I think we all admit that. We are not in the playoffs every single year. And 2016, in an odd way, was a special year. They're coming off a year in which they got to the World Series. They're completely ravaged by injuries. Everybody's hurt. Matt Harvey's hurt. Jacob deGrom is hurt. Their season looks dead and buried. And then they have this incredible second half in which, oh, wow, they're going to make the playoffs. And then it looks like they're collapsing again. When I think back to 2016, and there are memories from that year, certainly we all think about the horror of the wild card loss to San Francisco. But I think of this home run. I think of this home run because it was the most important hit of 2016. And if you at least agree with me that making the playoffs matters, then I would put this regular season home run up there with a lot of other, really with almost every regular season home run we've ever seen in terms of importance, in terms of what ended up happening, because obviously the Mets did make the postseason, even if it ended quickly. What I also remember kind of cool about that moment is you hear in the call by Gary, he didn't know it was gone. But Asdrubal Cabrera did. Because when Asdrubal swung the bat, he flips the bat away. He's pimping it. Meanwhile, it did not get out by a lot. So it certainly had a chance to be an embarrassing moment for Asdrubal Cabrera, but instead it turns into a game-winning home run and essentially sends the New York Mets to the playoffs. That's number 19. Number 18, y'all going to remember this one. Let's go all the way back to June 30th, 2000. It's just your normal night at Shea Stadium. And by that, I mean the Atlanta Braves are kicking the New York Mets' ass. It just is what it is. It's something we're sort of used to. They're getting beat up, but luckily it's fireworks night. And the beauty of fireworks night is that nobody leaves early. And I always love to say that about this game because if it wasn't fireworks night, people would have left this game early. There's no way when the Mets came to the plate in that you'll never forget 8th inning, and the Mets are trailing in this game 8-1. There's nobody in their right mind who would have stayed, unless you're a diehard, or it's your one game to go to per year. So there'll be people there, but most people are leaving. But because it was firework night, the place was packed. And the one thing I kind of will never forget about this faithful night against Atlanta, of course, we're talking about the 10-run inning against the Braves that night, was that the biggest hit was not the home run we're about to play. The biggest hit was Edgardo Alfonzo before that, tying the game against Terry Mulholland. Once Piazza came up, the game is 8-8. I mean, we got this game in the bag. But I'm showing you my fairness, ladies and gentlemen, because if this was personal, if this was about me, you're going to think I'm nuts. I'd put the Asdrubal home run above the Piazza home run. But it's not about me. It's about you. And I know that this moment is incredibly special. Mike Piazza is all over this list. But if you are of a certain age, you'll never forget the way it was hit, the way it was down the line, and the exclamation point to one of the greatest innings in the history of the New York Mets. Here it is, home run number 18. Mike Piazza caps off the 10-run inning.
Jammed house at Shea. What a show. 8-8. Piazza, 2 down. Mets have scored 6 runs with 2 away. Piazza rips it. Will it stay fair? Goodbye, home run! Mike Piazza! A 3-run homer! 11-8!
I tell you, Gary Thorne is amazing, man. Gary Thorne is littered throughout Met history. He was the broadcaster with Bob Murphy in the mid-'80s. He's got that famous stunned disbelief line after the bouncer that went through the legs of Bill Buckner. He's in Yankee history because I think his call of the Don Mattingly home run in 1995 is amazing. This roof is going to come off or whatever the heck he says. I thought he was unbelievable, and I'm glad that we could hear Gary Thorne's voice in the middle of this because he was a part of some great moments. And I'll tell you, that home run that Mike hit was maybe one of the loudest times I've ever heard Shea Stadium during a regular season game. You know, I'll put the playoffs kind of on its own level. But when he hit that home run, and I think a part of it was the aggression that we all have against Atlanta, how much we hated the Braves. Remember, this is June 30th, 2000. We lost to the Braves in the NLCS. The Braves were our daddies. And you're getting blown out, and it's 8-1, and it's clearly going to be a loss, or at least that's what we thought. So I think a part of that was not just the comeback, not just that it was Mike Piazza, but I think that pump fist he did when he hit that ball down the left field line and it barely got out, so atypical or untypical, I should say, of Mike Piazza. I think a lot of that was letting the emotion out. So there is home run number 18. Let's get to the playoffs. We've done a lot of regular season home runs. Let's go to home run number 17. This is one of the most underrated home runs in the history of the New York Mets. And the reason it's underrated is because the Mets lost the series. I understand that. But in game 1 of the 2006 National League Championship Series, we had a hell of a pitcher's duel between Tommy Glavine and Jeff Weaver. That's the other thing that gets forgotten. We all hate Tom Glavine. Sports hate, that is. But Tom Glavine did have, believe it or not, some good moments with the New York Mets. It's why I'd argue Tom Glavine was a better Met than Max Scherzer. When did Max Scherzer pitch 7 scoreless innings in a playoff game or any kind of big game? And that's what Glavine did in game 1 of the NLCS, especially because the Mets couldn't hit. They couldn't figure out Jeff Weaver. He retired the first 6 guys to start the game. They had a leadoff hit in the 3rd inning. That went nowhere. In fact, by the time the 6th inning came around, the Mets had 1 hit in this game. There were 2 outs and nobody on. It's the 6th inning. It's 0-0. And we're tense. We're like, yeah, are we going to score a run? Are we going to lose game 1 to St. Louis? And then Paul LaDuca came through with a base hit to left field. And with 2 outs and a runner on first base, and a count tied at 2-2, we were thinking about this since the moment we signed him. Can Carlos Beltran recreate the postseason magic that he had 2 years earlier with the Houston Astros? Well, we know what would happen a week later in Game 7, but in Game 1, Beltran was clutch.
Beltran waits on a 2-2. Weaver delivers. Hit in the air to deep right field. Forget it. That is long gone. Off the scoreboard in right field. A 2-run homer for Carlos Beltran. His first of this postseason. And the Mets have gone in front 2-0. A 2-run bomb by Beltran off Jeff Weaver.
And Beltran picks up where he left off against the Cardinals in 2004. 2-0 New York.
That was a bomb. 430 feet to right center field. It was the only offense in the game. That's all the Mets would need. 7 scoreless out of Tommy Glavine. The bullpen pitched 2 scoreless innings, and the Mets, at least early on in that series, took command with a 1-0 series lead. That home run, I could argue, on this entire list, is one of the most underrated home runs the Mets have ever had. And look, if your argument back to me is they lost the series, shut your mouth. I mean, you could say that about a lot of home runs, unless they were hit in 1986 or 1969. But they did win the game. And you're going to notice that's a common bond. I'll give you a little hint. Every home run that you will hear in the top 20, with the exception of one, occurred in a win. I know what you're thinking. How did a home run not occur in a win? More on that, and you will hear it on this edition of the Rico Brogna. I can promise you that. So we've got Carlos Beltran hitting an underrated home run in Game 6 in 2006, or Game 1 in 2006. There's another underrated home run in that series. Yeah, another one. And that is Game 6 against the St. Louis Cardinals. Same series. Let's not forget, the New York Mets were down 3-2. Because even though Tom Glavine was great in Game 1, he crapped the bed in Game 5. So the Mets came back to Shea Stadium, trailing in this National League Championship Series 3-2. After a first inning that was very, very rocky by John Mayne, but he was able to get out of it when Hall of Famer Scott Rowland skied out with the bases loaded and 2 outs. Bottom of the first inning, 0-0. I said this to my dad at the time. I'll say it to you on the Rico. Jose Reyes supplied us what I thought was the Lenny Dykstra moment of our lifetime. A leadoff, game-setting home run in Game 6. Third pitch of the game from Chris Carpenter. Jose Reyes delivered.
Here's the 1-1. And it's driven in the air to right field pretty deep. Encarnacion back at the wall. It is gone. A home run. Jose Reyes takes Carpenter deep over the right field wall at the 371 mark, and the Mets have a 1-0 lead.
That was a lead they would never relinquish. They actually made it a 4-0 game. Cardinals made it close in the 9th inning because Billy Wagner sucks, and they held on and won 4-2. There are 2 things I think about from that game. I think of Reyes' home run. To me, that's why it's worthy of being a top 20 home run in the history of the franchise, a leadoff home run in a Game 6 that they won, forcing a 7th game. But the other thing I think back to about this game is that the Mets had a 4-0 lead going into the 9th inning, and they went to Billy Wagner. And Billy Wagner almost blew the game. And the reason that matters and the reason that's important is that became the reason, in my opinion, why Willie Randolph wouldn't trust Billy Wagner again in this series. Because a day later in Game 7, tie game at home in the 9th inning, we never saw Billy Wagner. We saw Aaron Heilman come out for a 2nd inning, and of course, he gave up the infamous home run to Yadier Molina. Billy Wagner being so ineffective, and Billy Wagner, excuse my French, sucking in the NLCS is as big of a reason for why the Mets lost this series as anything else. So when we talk about Wagner as a Hall of Famer, it's difficult for me to separate that from it. Okay, I know he was a great pitcher. By the way, this is not the last time you'll hear about Billy Wagner. No, it is the last time. That's right. I think an honorable mention was Piazza going deep off Billy Wagner. That's right. I was going to say we're going to mention him again. Not really, but him almost blowing Game 6 led to them losing Game 7, in my opinion. So congratulations to Jose Reyes. I mentioned his name a few times here on this Rico Brogna. That home run, number 16 in the history of the New York Mets. Let's go back to 1985. There's another one that's before my time, but I have to appreciate it. October 1st, 1985. The New York Mets are opening up a huge series against the St. Louis Cardinals. They're 3 games back. There's 6 games to go in the year. And the Mets and the Cardinals engaged in an absolute classic. In a game that was an old-fashioned pitcher's duel. Ron Darling versus John Tudor. And think about how big this is. The Mets are 3 games back with 6 to go, and they've got 3 games with the Cardinals. If they sweep the series, they're tied for first place. And maybe the Mets win the division. And maybe 1985 ends a little bit differently than the way it did. Game one is important. Game one is a game you have to have. And Ron Darling delivered with 9 scoreless innings. Think about that, 9 scoreless innings. John Tudor responded with 10 scoreless innings. What planet are we on? 9 scoreless from Ronnie, 10 scoreless from John Tudor, and then Darryl Strawberry came to the plate to take on Ken Daly. And I think to a lot of our older listeners and viewers, they'll tell you this is the most infamous, biggest, greatest home run in the history of the New York Mets regular season. I think we'd all agree Lindor passed it. But let's go back. October 1st, 1985, Darryl Strawberry not only hits a game-winning home run in the 11th inning in St. Louis, he puts that sumbitch off the clock.
Oh, baby, that one is way out of here. The Mets lead it 1-0 in the 11th inning as Darryl Strawberry crushes one. Look at that bench.
Oh, yes. Everybody was pumped up. How could you not be? And the Mets would hold on. They'd beat the Cardinals. Obviously, the season would not end well because they weren't able to sweep the St. Louis Cardinals, and they came up a little bit short in 1985. So like I mentioned, we've got 2 moments from 1985, a year in which the New York Mets did not make the postseason, but it was certainly a very special year and maybe made more special by the fact that now, with history on our side, we know what happened next. That certainly helps it out. We know how it all ends. But Darryl Strawberry off the clock against the St. Louis Cardinals, not too bad. That's home run number 15. Let's get to home run number 14. We're going to honor this man this year with his number being retired. And I think to a lot of Met fans, this moment we're about to play may be number 1 for you. When you think of David Wright, when you think of everything he did as a New York Met, all his contributions. He came back in 2015 during our honorable mention edition of the Rico. You heard David Wright hitting that dramatic home run against the Philadelphia Phillies. That was a sign of him being back. Well, David Wright was also playing his first World Series game ever for Game 3 against the Kansas City Royals. As we all remember, the Mets lost Game 1. They lost Game 2, and man, there was a lot of pressure. Can they avoid going down 3-0? Game 3 is known for a few things. It's known for Noah Syndergaard throwing up and in on Alcides Escobar. It then later turned into the, hey, Mike Moustakas, meet me at the mound, basically. 60 feet, 6 inches. But what we kind of forget is that after Noah Syndergaard took care of Alcides Escobar, he gave up a run. The Royals actually scratched out a run in the first inning, and so the Mets were down 1-0. Curtis Granderson got on to start the bottom of the first inning, and then David Wright came to the plate. And in his first World Series at-bat at Citi Field, David Wright made Citi Field maybe as loud as it's ever been.
The 0-1. Swinging a high fly ball, well hit to left field. It may go. Gordon back. There it goes. Home run. David Wright has hit his first World Series home run over the Great Wall of Flushing beyond the Party City deck in left center field. And the Mets have taken a 2-1 lead.
Flair for the dramatic. Again, he comes off the DL, remember? And he hit a home run about that far in Philadelphia, as if to say, hey, I'm back.
You know what's crazy? That wasn't the home run that turned that into an easy game. Mets won Game 3 9-3, but the Royals actually came back and scored 2 runs in the top of the second inning. Noah Syndergaard did not get off to a good start in this game. He did settle down, ended up pitching 6 pretty quality innings, but the Royals actually took a 3-2 lead after David Wright hit that 2-run home run. It was actually another 2-run home run a few innings later that turned out to be the kind of the most important moment, and the moment where the Mets took the lead and they started to run away with it. And that was actually hit by Curtis Granderson. So it shows you that this home run by David was not on this list or remembered because of its import in that particular game. It was important, but it wasn't even the most important home run of the game. As we talked about, Curtis Granderson ended up hitting the game-winning 2-run home run a few innings later. It's about who he is. It's about David Wright. It's about what he means to all of us. It was about the fact that, man, that's his first World Series game he did that. So a lot of emotion goes into that, but I think certainly worthy of being on this list. and worthy of being the 14th best home run in the history of the New York Mets. I did have a little bit of a bias towards the postseason, but how can you not? I mean, the playoffs are the playoffs. Speaking of the postseason, let's get to another home run. Home run number 13. And you would think I did this on purpose. That home run number 13 is by number 13? But I promise you, it was an absolute coincidence. Game 1 of the 1999 National League Division Series is a game that I still believe very few people watched. Because as I look at my scorecard, let me confirm this. First pitch was at 11:10 p.m. And even though it was a relatively high-scoring game, it was under 3 hours, so we were lucky. It ended at 2:03 a.m. The Mets beat the Arizona Diamondbacks that day, and Edgardo Alfonzo really set the tone because they were facing Randy Johnson with no rest after the Mets had beaten the Reds the day before to make the playoffs. And Alfonzo hit a home run off Randy Johnson in the first inning. The Mets actually took an early 1-0 lead in this game. They built a 3-0 lead against the Diamondbacks and Randy Johnson. They built a 4-1 lead. Unfortunately, Masato Yoshi gave it back, and the Diamondbacks were able to rally. Luis Gonzalez hit a game-tying 2-run home run in the 6th inning. And so after building this lead off the great Randy Johnson, which is damn impressive considering how good Randy Johnson was back then, especially in that season, the Mets still had to fight. It's a 4-4 game. They had this big lead against Randy Johnson, and they blew it. And in the 9th inning, Buck Showalter, the manager at the time, allowed Randy Johnson to start the 9th inning. By the way, Randy Johnson ended up throwing 136 pitches in this game, which is just amazing to think about. And the Mets put a rally together against Randy Johnson. They got a base hit from Robin Ventura. They tried to get a bunt down with Roger Cedeno. It completely failed. They got a shocking base hit by Ray Ordonez, and Melvin Mora drew a walk. At that point, Buck Showalter finally said, all right, I think Randy's done. Let me take him out of this game. And he went to a guy who I only remember because of this moment, Bobby Schwannard. And after Ricky Henderson grounded out, bases loaded, 2 outs, tie game. Are the Mets going to blow this opportunity in the top of the 9th inning? They had bases loaded, 1 out. They can't score. The Mets have to take advantage of this. And they had, luckily, the guy you wanted up more than anybody else. And that is not a knock at Olerud and certainly not a knock at Piazza. It's a reminder on how freaking good Edgardo Alfonzo was. Here it is. Fonzie slam.
3-1 pitch and a drive in the air to deep left field, down the line, gone if it stays fair. That ball is out of here! Out of here! Grand slam home run! Alfonso, a grand slam in the top of the 9th, and the Mets have taken an 8-4 lead. Alfonso hit it out of sight down the left field line, just inside the foul pole. His 2nd home run of the game. Alfonso with a grand slam with 2 out in the top of the 9th. And the Mets have taken an 8-4 lead. A stunning moment for the New York Mets. Edgardo Alfonzo with a big home run last night. A home run in the 1st inning tonight. And a grand slam in the 9th inning to give the Mets an 8-4 lead.
Oh, I was so worried that might go foul at the last moment. He hit it down the line, and he hit it long enough to be 2 home runs.
How about that little Bob Murphy at the end, right? Little Murph at the end. I love the way Gary Cohen used to call him Alfonzo. Alfonzo. But Edgardo Alfonzo was their most underrated player, and I think even to this day he's underrated. But this home run deserves it. It deserves to be in the top 20, and coincidentally ended up at 13. I promise you that was not a planned thing. It's just the way it finished. But this is why 1999 does remind me of the year we just finished, 2024. The 25-year anniversary, because 1999 was a whirlwind. It really was. It was a whirlwind in which their season's about to go bad, which they had, and then they fired a bunch of coaches and turned their season around. Mets season's going bad. They DFA Jorge Lopez. Grimace throws out the first pitch, and they start to roll. There was that near choke at the end, like the Mets this past year, where they struggled in Atlanta and they struggled in Milwaukee, but then recovered. Mets had that in 1999, where they needed to win a bunch of games at home at the end of the season against the Pirates. And then you have the whirlwind. Like the Mets whirlwind in 1999 was winning those 3 games against the Pirates at Shea, immediately having to go to Cincinnati for a one-game playoff, and then immediately going to Arizona. So they're at New York, Cincinnati, Arizona. There's all these big moments, all these crazy moments, and the Mets keep winning. And 2024 had that as well. The whirlwind of Atlanta to Milwaukee to Atlanta, back to Milwaukee to Philadelphia, back home, take a deep breath. So I said it at the time. I'll say it again. 1999 and 2024 kind of remind me of each other. Speaking of 1999, you are about to hear the one home run that was hit in a loss. And I know you're probably thinking, how do you get there, Evan? It's like giving the MVP to a last place finish or the MVP to the team that doesn't win the World Series, a World Series MVP. How do you get there? Well, let me take you back to that same year of 1999. The Mets are playing their arch rival Atlanta Braves, and they're down 3-0. They're dead. They win game 4 at Shea Stadium. They win game 5, the Ventura Grand Slam single. And now they have done something almost impossible. They have forced a game 6 after being down 3-0. Al Leiter makes this start. He was not really ready to make this start. He had warmed up in game 5, and he had absolutely nothing. Hits the first batter of the game, walks a guy, hits a batter, gives up a hit. Al Leiter did not record an out. And the Mets were losing 5-0 before your butt could be comfortable in the seat for this game they needed to win. And the Mets didn't actually start rallying until the 6th inning. That's when they put a little rally together and scored 3 runs off of Kevin Millwood. But what was very underrated in this game is that they're down 5-0, but Pat Mahomes Sr., I just call him Pat Mahomes, but I guess I have to clarify, pitched 4 beautiful innings out of the bullpen, keeping the game tight, keeping it at 5-0, allowing the Mets to score those 3 runs in the 6th inning and make things interesting. But you know what's crazy? After the Mets scored those 3 runs, the Atlanta Braves immediately responded by scoring 2 more runs. They got a huge 2-run, 1-out or 2-out single in the 6th inning that turned a game that was 5-3 into 7-3. That was the moment where, all right, this is just not happening. But in the 7th inning, they rally. In the 7th inning, they start putting it all together a little bit. They get a leadoff double by Matt Franco. They get a double by Ricky Henderson. Edgardo Alfonzo hits one a mile, but it's caught at the wall. John Olerud comes through with a base hit. And then Mike Piazza comes to the plate. The Mets are now trailing 7-5. They are facing future Hall of Famer John Smoltz. But John Smoltz is not healthy. This is an injured John Smoltz. This is a sidearming John Smoltz. And for my money, this is me speaking, but I guess it's also the list speaking. Hold on. Let me see. Yeah, probably much is the list speaking. Besides 9/11, which we put in its own category, I think this was the greatest home run Mike Piazza ever hit. I think it is the most clutch home run Mike Piazza ever hit. They are down 7-5 in a game 6. They were down 5-0 in this game. They were down 7-3 in this game. And here's Mike Piazza with 1 out in the 7th inning against the sidearming John Smoltz. Tell me this isn't one of the great home runs in the history of the New York Mets.
The 2-1 to Piazza. Hit in the air to deep right center. Way back. And gone! To tie the game at 7. Tied at 7, hoping for game 7.
I get chills listening to that home run. Now, the problem is the rest of this game is death. They took the lead in the 8th inning on a base hit by Melvin Mora. They give it back in the bottom of the 8th inning when the game is blown by the immortal John Franco on an RBI hit by Brian Hunter. Talk about random. They then retake the lead in the 10th inning. And again, they're 3 outs away from forcing a 7th game. This had never been done. And Armando Benitez blows it. Ozzie Guillen gets the game-tying hit. And it obviously ends with Kenny Rogers walking Andrew Jones, and the Mets lose the game. But I think if there's ever a home run, and if there's ever a moment that can defy the outcome of the game, it's that one. And this kind of makes me a contradiction. And I admit that. Like Endy Chavez's catch in Game 7, I can't celebrate. I can't celebrate it because they lost the game. I think the reason why this is so different, in my opinion, was because A, they're down 3-0 in the series. B, they're down 5-0 and 7-3 in the game. And just the magic of Piazza going oppo against John Smoltz in that moment late in the game. I just think it's the best. And it kind of traveled to the same area where his home run off Billy Wagner was hit. If you heard our honorable mention, Rico Brogna, we talked about that clutch home run that Mike hit a year earlier against Billy Wagner and the Astros. But that one, even in a loss, and it's the only one, the only home run that made this list that was in a loss. Mike Piazza, home run against the Braves, moment number 12. We now present to you your final regular season home run. So until Francisco Lindor, I would put this home run up as the greatest home run ever hit in the regular season of the New York Mets. Even better than the Darryl Strawberry home run against St. Louis. Because ultimately, what gives this home run the edge is that it led to something amazing. July 31st, 2015. The New York Mets are taking on the Washington Nationals. Wilmer Flores cried just a few days earlier. The Mets had traded him, in theory, for Carlos Gomez. That trade falls apart, and you can't make this crap up. Wilmer Flores is coming up in a tie game in extra innings in a pennant race game against the Washington Nationals in the 12th inning? No freaking way. But he not only came up, he delivered. To me, until Lindor, the greatest regular season home run in the history of the New York Mets and number 11 on our list.
Flores drives it. Deep left center field. Taylor back near the wall. It's out of here! Flores ends it with a home run! Flores night at Citi Field comes to a fitting close, and the Mets win it 2-1 in 12. 2 nights ago, he thought he was traded. In tears on the field, he gets his 4th standing ovation of the night as he ends it with a long ball.
And maybe tears of joy now.
Yeah, I think the reason I put this above the other regular season home runs is where it led and then the human nature of it. Like the idea that here's this guy who grew up in the Met organization. He thinks he's traded. He's crying. He's upset. The Mets hit rock bottom the next day when Justin Upton's hitting a home run off Jeurys Familia. And here they are just a few days later, especially after they trade for Cespedes, though he hasn't played yet. And Wilmer Flores is hitting the game-winning home run against the Nationals. And when you look back at 2015 and the magic that was that season, it was over from that point on. It was on like Teflon. So I think deservedly the 11th best home run in the history of the New York Mets. We've got more. We will give you the top 10 on the very next edition of Rico Brogna. If you have thoughts about these rankings, thoughts about these home runs, maybe your own personal thoughts about these home runs, you can always email us, thericob@gmail.com. Also, if you missed our honorable mention edition, that came out a few days earlier. You can download that wherever you download your Rico and your podcast. And you can hear other home runs that were great, that were amazing, that were awesome, but did not make this list. But that, number 20 through 11, on the next edition of the Rico, we give you the top 10, counting all the way down to the greatest home run in the history of the New York Mets. Thank you very much for downloading and subscribing to this nice walk down memory lane edition of Rico Brogna.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Rico Brogna podcast. It's amazing, isn't it? Make sure you download it now to keep it on you at all times.